Hi, thank you for being a student mentor for Washington Bridge Education Foundation.
Thanks for having me. My name is Matthew Sporrer, and I'm a 2018 grad of Washington Community High School, and I chose the path of a flight attendant after getting my high school diploma.
That's fantastic. And at what point did you decide to make this career choice?
So actually, right after high school, I wanted to go into musical theater. It had been my dream for a super long time. So I decided to go major in musical theater out in New York, and I loved it more than anything. But I loved the schooling part of it. I realized that the theater part of it was not for me. And it gave me a really big kind of identity crisis of like, this is what I wanted to do my whole life. Now what do I do if I don't want to do this anymore? So I kind of looked at what I was doing with my free time, and the summer after freshman year, I had realized that instead of kind of like doing my theater homework and reading my plays and working on my songs and stuff, I was spending a lot more time watching documentaries about planes and airports and kind of like how to be a flight attendant and that kind of stuff. So when I was like weighing with what I use my time for, it wasn't theater, it was air travel and that kind of stuff. So I kind of like had to take a step back and be like, Matthew, what do you really want out of your life? And I realized that after school, I would love to do that because I wanted to get my bachelor's degree, and I ended up getting a bachelor's degree in theater. And then I added one in international relations because I wanted something that kind of catered to flight attendants. And I could have picked up hospitality, I could have picked up a travel bachelor's, all these different things, but the school I was at didn't offer those. So international relations was what I decided to go with.
In hindsight, it you went about this path. You started a different one and made changes, and that's going to
Yes.
happen for a lot of people. Would you, if someone's thinking about doing this right out of high school, would you say there are any classes that would be beneficial to maybe start taking in high school
Hmm.
to prepare for this? Now that
Yeah,
you
I
can
mean,
look at hindsight.
of course. I think the great thing about being a flight attendant is there isn't one type of person, or one type of history that is here. Because I have people who went out of college, they did some like service jobs, and then immediately went into the flight attendant. I did a 4-year degree, and I know people who had a whole career and were 50 and decided to become a flight attendant. So there's all these different types of people who can be a flight attendant, but there are some classes that may help you if this is like, this is my plan, this is what I want to do. Definitely public speaking, because I mean, I get to read off my PAs, but I'm kind of social studies class because you could be taking a flight from New York to Chicago, but there could be people from 40 countries on that flight. You don't know. So there's all these different people, religions that you're getting to experience, and to know a little bit about those is great. And I'd say the most important thing that if you wanted to do this would be to pick up a language class because it just gives you that opportunity to communicate with an entire another group of people. For example, in high school, I took French, which has helped me a little bit, not much, but more in college, I minored in Spanish. And that has really allowed me to communicate with an entire breadth of people. Because I mean, an entire continent speaks that language. So to be able to communicate with people is amazing. And even just on a flight from New York to Miami, you get people who speak Spanish and you who don't speak any other language. Even from Chicago to Peoria, I'm sure you get people who only speak Spanish. So to be able to communicate with those people is great. So I would say definitely any public speaking, any social studies class, and any language class that you resonate with.
Great, good advice. And what were the steps that you took once you decided this path to begin the ball rolling to become a flight attendant?
Yeah, so this is actually a really long process. The application process, it starts with a application. So that's a resume and a cover letter. I don't know a job that doesn't take a resume and a cover letter nowadays, but a resume and a cover letter, and then you take an immediate online assessment. So with that online assessment, it kind of like says, oh, this is the way they answered. I think they would be good, or I think they'd be bad. If you get put in the good pile, they say, hey, we would love to invite you to a virtual interview. So you wait a couple weeks. The waiting is a long time, but then you get asked to go to a virtual interview, which they put you up on a screen. And with mine was 27 other people. They said, hello, nice to meet you all. And they asked us each 2 questions, all unique questions. So it could have been anything from what do you think a flight attendant should be? Or have you had a time in your career where you've worked with difficult people, all these things that kind of relate to being a flight attendant. They thanked us for our time and they said you'll hear in about 5 to 7 business days. So in that time, we waited and then I got heard back and they were like, we'd love to invite you to a face-to-face interview. So the company flies me out to Dallas, which is where American Airlines is headquartered. And we do kind of the same thing. They put us in a room, we do some team building activities, they ask us questions again, similar themed questions. And really, they're just trying to see how we are as people, if we would be a good fit for the company. And if they liked us, they asked us to stay for a one on one interview. And in that one on one interview, they asked us for something, they asked us last minute questions. They went over our resume and they offered us a thing called a CJO, which is a conditional job offer. And that means you got the job, but really you have to wait until end of training. So it's the condition that you pass training that you get to be a flight attendant. The training for us is 6 weeks. So you move to Dallas for 6 weeks and live in a hotel. And it's a difficult experience, but really it's just making sure that you can do all the safety things. So there are tests that you do, there are kind of workshops you go to, make sure you can evacuate a plane in 90 seconds, make sure you can do all these different things, board people, deplane people, kind of how to do your job essentially, because none of us are born knowing how to be flight attendants. And then with this, they take you, you have your 6 weeks, you graduate, and then five days after that, you move to your base and begin working. So it is a long process. Mine took from about May and I graduated in November. So it took almost half a year for me to get from the application to the end. But it's a really rewarding process, especially if you are really wanting to do this. And I would say one of the main things to keep in mind is that to apply to American Airlines mainline, you do have to be 20 years old, which I know might sound like a long way away to someone in high school, but the things that you can do until then are really what help you build that resume. Because if you go in with an empty resume, I promise you, you're not getting this job. It's because they have thousands and hundreds of thousands of people who apply to this job, and they take about 1% of people to training. So it is a competitive job, but if you make your resume competitive, that's what's going to put you in the room where it happens. So the things to do from graduation in high school or even before graduation of high school to 20 years old is you can either go get a 4-year degree, and that's the path that I chose. I waited until I was 22 to apply for this job. But if you're like, this is what I want to do, you can apply to regional airlines even starting at 19, which is like you have to be 19 by their training. So you could apply maybe at 18 and a half. Some things you can do to pad your resume even before this process is get jobs like customer service jobs, get jobs in hospitality, and get jobs in the service industry. Because that's really what flight attendants are. As much as we're there for your safety, we're also there to serve you a drink and prepare you a meal in the sky if you're in first class. But for example, I worked at Menards in Washington, which looked good for kind of like customer service. I worked at a Starbucks on Long Island. So that's like preparing drinks. I do that in the sky now. So if I can pour coffee on the ground, I'm pretty sure I can pour coffee in the sky. It's that kind of stuff. And if you could work at a hotel, that hospitality industry, or even if you can work in any kind of customer service job at a restaurant, these are the things that look good to flight attendants because they know you're nice. They know you can take orders. They know you can talk to people. That's really what they care about. They don't care who you are. Something they told me in training was, I can teach you how to evacuate a plane in 90 seconds. I can teach you how to pour a drink. I can teach you how to mix a drink. I can teach you how to do XYZ. I can't teach you how to be nice. And that's really what they're looking for, is someone nice. So if you have the skills to back that up on your resume, that niceness will come through in the interview, and I have no doubt that you'll be chosen.
That's great advice. So if they're thinking about, if a student is thinking about leaving high school to pursue this and they have some time on their hands and they're going to work possibly in a service industry, if they do decide to do like a tier 2-year degree or something like that, is there a degree that you would recommend? You did international studies. Would you recommend a certain type of degree or certificate to get to build that as they're applying?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I would say there's not one degree that's important. Again, I know 10 million different people, people who majored in business, people who I majored in theater, people who didn't major in anything. But if you're looking for an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree, places to start are schools with uh, bachelor's in travel, bachelor's in hospitality, bachelor's in customer service, because again, that's the area you're going to be moving into. So these are great ways to start, but there's really not or if you wanted to major in a language, a major in Spanish, major in French, major in Chinese, these are all great ways to get you in that direction. But again, there's not really a wrong choice. There are just better and worse choices.
Okay, so you went about it a couple, different ways to end up where
Mm-hmm.
you are today. You talked about your training, your schooling. Do tell us actually where you are today and what's typical for you now that this is your career.
Yeah. So I when I got based out of training, they gave us 8 cities to choose from, which are our hubs. And sometimes they'll give people 2 cities, sometimes they'll give them 10. It just kind of depends. So I got 8 choices, and the top of my list was New York City because that's where I went to school and it's where I knew I wanted to live. One of our bases is also Chicago. So if you did want to stay near home and work for American Airlines, I know United also has a base there, you could put Chicago as your first choice, and there's a chance. The one thing to keep in mind is you don't get a choice. They take your preference in, but you get what they give you. So I got picked with New York, and I got sent to New York. If I wanted to transfer, I could transfer starting now. So I was like, hey, I really don't like New York. I want to transfer back to Chicago. That's something you can do, and it's something you learn throughout the process. But yeah, I'm in New York, and what a basic day looks like for me is the night before, I get my schedule, and my schedule could either be a trip, it could be a airport standby, or it could be reserve. So if I get a trip, that's the easiest thing. I wake up, I take public transit to the airport, and I go on a trip. I could go anywhere. I've been to Tel Aviv and I've been to Omaha. And these are both great places to be, but they are very different. So you kind of have to prepare. You have to have your suitcase packed. Um, Kind of for anything. For example, and then with airport standby, that's where you go to the airport, you sit there for a certain amount of hours, and they could call you if someone shows up sick. They say, "Hey, Matthew, you're going to go on this flight. Get to the gate in 30 minutes," or not even like in 2 minutes. So they take you, and that's when my suitcase has to be packed for anything. I could be wearing shorts in Miami on the beach, or I could be in a blizzard in Minnesota, and I just have to be ready to go. And the last thing is something called reserve, which is you basically sit at home. So I get paid to sit at home during the day, and they call me if they need me, and they say, "Hey, Matthew, you have 3 hours to get to the airport." Um, but like yesterday, I sat reserve. They didn't use me, so I was essentially just getting paid to sit around my house, which is pretty great. But so every day looks different, and that's what I love about being a flight attendant. Is I don't want to go into a 9 to 5 job, sit in an office, write emails. I want to go to a job where I could go anywhere that day. And so, for example, on a trip, my last trip, I flew one flight to Miami. I stayed in a hotel in Miami for 21 hours. So I was on the beach, I was doing all this stuff. And then the next day, I flew a 6 hour flight to Seattle. So when I went to Seattle, I stayed in the hotel there, from Seattle to Dallas and Dallas back to New York. So your trips always start and end in the city that you're based in. But if you don't want to live in the city you're based in, you can also do that. So, for example, if you were based in Chicago, but really, really, really wanted to stay home in Peoria, that's something you could do. There's a thing called commuters. So, whereas a normal person commutes on a car or a train or a bus, because we work for the airlines, we can commute on planes. So I know people who live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and commute. So you get a trip, you commute in the day before, you work in New York, and then after you get off your trip, you fly back to Charlotte, North Carolina. And you could do that with Chicago and Peoria. You could do that with really anywhere you want to live. And that's the cool thing about this job is you can live anywhere, but it is easier to live in one of the base cities because then you don't have to be on planes every single day.
Great. Good information to know. And um, it sounds like you have set yourself up at a young age and you're living independently. Could you
Mm-hmm.
talk to us a little bit about pay as a flight attendant and where you're living? You mentioned some pros, but there are cons too. So any pros or cons you can
Yes.
think of, and pay, and how that works structurally.
Yeah, absolutely. So with pay, because we're a union, flight attendants are under a union with American Airlines, and almost every flight attendant or every airline has a union that they work for. So my pay is set. I don't get to negotiate it. I don't get to change it. The union does that for me. So I start at $30.50 an hour, and I go up every year from there. If you work for a regional airline, that can be a little less, and there's not many airlines that is much more than that to start at least. And by the end of 13 years, I'll be making $75 an hour. So I know that now, and because I have a contract, that's great. But obviously, you don't get paid for the full time you work as a flight attendant, which is one thing that is hard. Like, I don't get paid for boarding. I get paid for when the boarding door closes to when the boarding door opens. So I might be working for from the time I leave my house to the time I get back to my house, it might be a 10-hour day, and I get paid for 5 hours. So these are like the gives and takes that come with being a flight attendant. Is like, yeah, I'm getting a good pay, but you don't get paid for 80 hours a week like a 9 to 5 job would, or 40 hours a week. So just to recap a little, there are definitely pros and there are definitely cons to this job. The pros are you get to go to these amazing places and you get to meet amazing people. I've been to Tel Aviv, I've been to Seattle, I've been to New York City. And I mean, these are not things that I thought I would be doing when I lived in Washington, Illinois. I knew I wanted to get out. I didn't know I would get this far out, but that's amazing. And you meet the best people and you see the best places and you really get to live a dream. But the thing is, with that dream, it does come with some cons. Like, long hours. You're standing up the whole flight. So where you get to sit for 2 hours on a flight, I stand for 2 hours of flight and serve you drinks and serve you food, all that kind of stuff. And the other hard thing is if you really are a homebody, this can be a really hard job because I missed this Thanksgiving with my family. I missed this Christmas with my family. They all still live in Washington. So I did get the chance to come back kind of in between Thanksgiving and Christmas. But anytime there's high travel, I'm working. So that's during the summer, during Christmas, during Thanksgiving, during other holidays. So these are hard things. And again, the pay is amazing and it goes up very quickly, but you're not getting paid for a lot of work that you do. So you really have to love this job to do it. And I do. I think there's no better job in the world to be able to go and travel every single day and ride on airplanes and just be in airports. That's really cool to me. But there are definitely gives and takes to this job. It takes a special person to do it, but if you want to do it, you definitely can.
Well, I have to ask because it is the start of 2023, and for the last
Hmm.
couple years, there's been so much news about how awful passengers and flights and
Yeah.
so forth. And you kind of came into this during this, blow
Hmm.
up of everything we see in the news, but you're stuck with it. So, should we believe everything we see and hear, or is it manageable?
I mean, it's 100% manageable because obviously the things you see in the news, they are one flight of hundreds, if not thousands, of flights that went off that day. Which obviously it is terrible for the people who experience those things, but I've never had a problem on a single one of my flights, and I think I've flown about 68 flights in 2 months, so I've not had a problem, and I will have problems. There will be times when things go wrong, but that's what I'm trained for. That's why I spent 6 weeks in Dallas. So obviously there are hard times, and with the pandemic, people got furloughed, but now those people are back, and they're just as happy to be back in the sky. So you can say that with any career, though, that there are hard times and there are difficult times, but the travel industry might just be a little more volatile. But as much as it falls down, it springs right back up. We're adding trips every day, we're adding new destinations. And just this year, we're hiring, I think, like 3,000 flight attendants. And I think that's only going to continue. So if this is something you want to do, definitely keep your eyes set on it and come join us at the airline.
That's great. It's so interesting to hear about this. And you haven't been out of high school very long. You've even didn't even start off on this path, but you are in it and
No.
you are certainly enjoying it. Where do you see yourself going? Are there ways to build up from this job? What are your plans in, let's say, 15 years from now?
Yeah,
Where do you think you'll be?
absolutely. My personal plan is I hope to still be living in New York City. I hope to have a family, and that's something you can do with this job. I know many people who their parents are flight attendants, and now they're flight attendants themselves, but all these different things, that shouldn't be something that keeps you from doing this job. But I see myself with a family. I would love to be something called a purser, which is a lead flight attendant on international flights. So I'd love to be flying a lot more international than I am right now. The other thing that I might do is you can take your job and be a flight attendant still, but you can work in our union. So I would love to get involved with the union here at American Airlines because that is something I really believe in and it helps make people's lives better. So I would really enjoy to get involved in any of those three things. And I think that's the beauty of being a flight attendant is I want to stay as a flight attendant and that's really what I want to do, but you can also go work in management. Our current CEO of flight service was a flight attendant when he started. So he was a flight attendant and now he's a CEO. So it doesn't stop on the plane. You can leave that plane, you can be a flight service manager, work at a base, you can be the CEO of our company, or you can stay a flight attendant till you're 60 or till you're think our most senior flight attendant, she just retired after 65 years of service. And that's where I see myself going. I want to stay here for as long as I can until they kick me off the planes.
Well, I hope to be on a flight with you someday. I don't know,
Absolutely.
maybe to New York, or maybe I'll go to
Yeah.
Tel Aviv. That would be great. Well, and one last question. So you were able to slide in with your experience, your resume and so
Hmm.
forth, and all your great process of interviews. If someone isn't of age, or they're going to class, or they're just
Yeah.
trying, maybe they didn't get the first application, they didn't get moved on in the process, would working at an airport help this at all? Is there something to an employment job at an airport that might give them an edge to become an attendant?
Yeah, absolutely. There's nothing specific that's like to do a flight attendant, do XYZ. But if you are interested in the airline industry, there's absolutely jobs you can do, even right in Peoria. I don't know if they're hiring right now, but they might be. We have a ton of airlines that work out of Peoria, and you could be a gate agent. So the people who checks people into a flight. You could be a ramp agent. So if you want to lift bags into the planes and kind of like wave the little sticks and say, plane, come this way, you can do those things. And those are great ways to get involved in the airport. But the other thing to do to really prepare for this job is uh, you might not get the first round of interviews, and that can be really hard. But half the game is interviews. Interviews are like a job unto themselves. So if you can find yourself in interviewing for other jobs, so even if you don't plan to do a job, go interview for Domino's, see how it works. Go interview for this job, build your resume, build your cover letter, just kind of see how interviewing is. Because I know so many people who would make great flight attendants, but can't interview to save their life, and they didn't get it. So really learn how to interview, learn how to be nice, and I say you have no problems.
Well, thank you. Great advice.
Of course.
We appreciate your time, and we will check back with you soon. Thank you.